Imagine coming home after a long business trip, only to find your wife laughing a little too closely with your best friend. Then, your own father admits he took bribes to keep quiet about it. But that's just the beginning. What if the betrayal ran even deeper? Your career sabotaged, your money stolen, your life dismantled piece by piece. They thought they could ruin me. They thought I wouldn't fight back. But they had no idea what was coming. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tightly as he turned onto his street, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. The long flight from Tokyo had left him drained. Yet his mind was still buzzing with ideas from the International Architecture Conference. New innovations, groundbreaking designs. His head had been filled with inspiration. But as his house came into view, all thoughts of work vanished in an instant. A sleek red sports car was parked in his driveway. It was out of place among the usual sedans and SUVs that lined the quiet suburban neighborhood. But what sent a chill through Lucas's spine was that he recognized the car immediately. It belonged to Damon, his colleague, someone he had worked alongside for years, a supposed friend. Something wasn't right. Lucas slowed the car to a stop, his pulse quickening. Through the open living room window, the sound of laughter drifted out, light-hearted and intimate. He hesitated, then took a step toward the house, careful not to make his presence known. Peering inside, what he saw sent a cold wave of realization washing over him. Vanessa, his wife of 10 years, sat on the couch next to Damon. Their bodies leaned too close, their hands grazing casually as they talked. She threw her head back in laughter, her expression full of warmth and familiarity. Not the kind shared between acquaintances, but something deeper. Lucas stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what his eyes confirmed. The weight of his travels, his work, his sacrifices. All of it felt meaningless in this moment. A voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. Surprised? Lucas turned sharply. Standing behind him on the porch was Charles, his father, leaning against the railing with a knowing smirk. "Your friend's been stopping by a lot while you were away," Charles continued, his voice dripping with disdain. "Slipping me some cash to keep quiet about it." Lucas felt his breath catch. His own father had known, had accepted money to turn a blind eye. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow, but he kept his expression unreadable. He stepped past Charles without a word, pushing open the front door. Inside, the shift in atmosphere was immediate. The moment Vanessa and Damon saw him, their smiles disappeared, their movements stiffening. They scrambled to create space between them, but it was too late. Lucas said nothing. His gaze swept over the scene. The untouched glasses of wine on the table, the flickering candlelight, the easy comfort they had shared before his arrival. Words felt pointless. Instead, he turned on his heel and walked toward his home office, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Once inside, he closed the door, pressing his back against it for a moment as he steadied his breathing. His heart pounded, not from shock, but from the realization of what needed to be done. This wasn't just about infidelity, it was something far deeper. His eyes landed on a framed wedding photo on the wall. A moment frozen in time, a promise made years ago. He stepped forward, removing the picture and revealing the small safe hidden behind it. The soft click of the lock opening filled the silent room. Stacks of financial documents, property deeds, and security backups. He had always believed in being prepared. Now, it felt less like security and more like leverage. As he placed everything into his briefcase, movement in the doorway caught his attention. Vanessa stood there, her face pale, her hands gripping the doorframe. "You can't just take those," she said, her voice strained. Lucas looked at her for a long moment, truly seeing her for the first time. Not as the woman he had once loved, but as someone who had carefully constructed a life of deception. Without a word, he walked past her, gripping the briefcase as if it were the only solid thing in his world. In the living room, Damon and Charles stood awkwardly, their previous bravado gone. The weight of what had just happened settled between them all. Lucas paused at the door. He didn't turn, but his voice, cold and deliberate, cut through the silence. "They say betrayal teaches you who your real enemies are." But it also teaches you something else. You don't have to warn the ones who have already lost. With that, he stepped outside, leaving them behind in the wreckage of what they had destroyed. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Calls, messages. He ignored them all. Driving away from the house that no longer felt like home, Lucas already knew where he needed to go. He needed time, space, to think, to plan. The distant glow of a rundown motel sign came into view, its flickering light barely illuminating the lot. It would do. Lucas paid in cash, using a name that wasn't his own. Inside the room, the air was stale, the furniture outdated, but it didn't matter. He emptied the contents of his briefcase onto the bed, spreading out the documents. Bank statements, property records, financial records he hadn't looked at in detail before. His fingers traced the dates on each transaction, his mind piecing together details he had never thought to question. Patterns emerged: withdrawals, transfers, inconsistencies in accounts linked to Vanessa's name. The betrayal didn't start yesterday. It had been happening for years. Lucas sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand over his face. The weight of it all threatened to crush him, but somewhere beneath the exhaustion and anger, something else stirred. A quiet, calculated determination. At 3 a.m., he reached for his phone. His fingers hovered over the screen for a moment before dialing a number he hadn't called in years. A familiar voice answered. "Mom." His voice cracked slightly, but there was no hesitation. "Everything's fallen apart." There was a pause, then a steady reply. "Come over." The drive to Evelyn's apartment was a blur. When she opened the door, she studied him carefully before stepping aside. The woman who had raised him, who had weathered storms of her own, understood without needing an explanation. As he stepped inside, something shifted. The night had broken him, but this moment, this decision, was the beginning of something else. Lucas wasn't going to be a victim. He was going to take everything back. Lucas sat at his mother's kitchen table, the worn wood cool beneath his fingers. The faint hum of the city outside the window barely registered in his mind. Evelyn moved with quiet efficiency, setting down a cup of coffee in front of him before taking a seat across the table. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. She had always been this way, waiting, observing, letting him come to terms with his own thoughts before forcing words out of him. Lucas exhaled slowly, then pushed the stack of documents toward her. "I need your help," he finally said. Evelyn, a retired forensic accountant, pulled the first bank statement closer, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the numbers. Years of experience allowed her to pick out patterns almost instantly. Lucas didn't need to tell her what to look for. The evidence was all there. Vanessa hadn't just betrayed him personally. She had been siphoning money, redirecting funds, hiding transactions under cleverly disguised expenses. It wasn't just personal withdrawals, either. Payments had been made to accounts he didn't recognize, transfers that lined up suspiciously with every major financial setback he had experienced. Evelyn set the papers down, her expression unreadable. "This didn't start recently," she said. "She's been planning this for years." Lucas had already suspected as much, but hearing it out loud hit differently. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "How bad is it?" he asked. Evelyn tapped her fingers against the table, thinking, "Bad enough that if you don't act fast, she could drain you completely before you even realize it's happening." Lucas inhaled sharply, nodding. He wasn't just dealing with an affair. He was dealing with someone who had been systematically dismantling his life from the inside. And he had let it happen. Evelyn, as if sensing the self-recrimination creeping in, reached for another set of documents. "We're not done yet," she said. If she was smart enough to do this, she didn't do it alone. Lucas sat forward, his focus sharpening. "Damon," he muttered. Evelyn nodded. "And possibly others." They worked in silence, combing through every financial statement, cross-checking every transaction, flagging anything that didn't make sense. The deeper they dug, the more the picture came into focus. Vanessa hadn't just taken money. She had been involved in deals that connected back to Damon. Lucas's stolen architectural designs, confidential project bids, leaked reports. Everything pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan to undermine him while boosting Damon's career. It was no coincidence that Damon had gotten ahead while Lucas had faced setback after setback. Vanessa had been feeding him information. Lucas clenched his fists, his mind racing. Every project he had poured his energy into, every late night spent perfecting designs, it had all been for nothing. Damon had taken credit for his work, selling ideas that weren't his own. And Vanessa had been complicit in all of it. A knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Evelyn stood and opened it, revealing a young woman with a laptop tucked under her arm. "This is Zoe," Evelyn introduced, stepping aside. "She's been helping me for a while now." Zoe offered a quick nod before dropping into the seat across from Lucas, opening her laptop without preamble. "I hear you need to dig a little deeper," she said, her fingers already flying across the keyboard. Lucas didn't ask how Evelyn knew a cybersecurity expert. He had learned long ago not to question his mother's connections. Minutes later, Zoe's screen filled with strings of data, logs of forwarded emails, hidden folders, and encrypted messages. "She wasn't careful," Zoe muttered, scrolling. "There are traces of everything. Transactions, conversations, contracts. She thought deleting them made them disappear, but nothing really disappears online." Lucas watched as emails surfaced. Messages Vanessa had forwarded from his account to Damon. They contained blueprints, financial projections, even sensitive safety reports for upcoming developments. His stomach twisted. She hadn't just betrayed their marriage. She had actively sabotaged his career. Zoe clicked on another file, and a chat log appeared. Vanessa and Damon's names appeared at the top. Lucas forced himself to read. "Damon, he's gone this week. I need the revised blueprint. Vanessa already sent it. Just make sure it doesn't look too much like his original work. Damon, don't worry. He won't even know it's missing. Vanessa, he never does." Lucas leaned back, staring at the screen, his heartbeat a steady, controlled rhythm. He had been blind, too trusting, too focused on his own work to notice what had been happening right under his nose. Not anymore. Evelyn watched him carefully. "What's the plan?" she asked. Lucas didn't hesitate. "We collect everything. Every transaction, every message, every blueprint he's stolen. I don't just want to confront them. I want to make sure they can never do this to anyone else." Evelyn nodded approvingly. Zoe smirked. "Now we're talking." Lucas exhaled, pushing down the anger threatening to consume him. Anger wasn't useful, not yet. He had the truth. Now he needed to decide how to use it. And when the time came, Vanessa and Damon wouldn't see it coming. Lucas spent the next few days methodically gathering everything he needed. Every transaction, every stolen file, every piece of correspondence between Vanessa and Damon. It was all compiled, organized, and locked away in multiple locations. He wasn't going to rush. He wasn't going to act out of anger. This wasn't about revenge. It was about dismantling everything they had built on his back. His career had suffered because of them. His finances had been drained while they lived comfortably off his work. They had stolen not just money but opportunities, projects he had designed, deals he had worked for. It wasn't just betrayal. It was calculated destruction. Now it was their turn. Lucas sat in a dimly lit cafe, a quiet corner where no one would pay him any attention. Across from him, Evelyn sipped her coffee, eyes scanning a document on her tablet. "This will be enough," she finally said, tapping the screen. "Enough to put both of them in serious legal trouble." Lucas nodded. "But we're not just going to hand this over. Not yet." Evelyn's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of approval in her eyes. Zoe had already played her part, sending copies of the most incriminating files to a carefully selected list of individuals. Industry leaders, potential investors, corporate compliance officers. But none of them knew yet what they had in their inboxes. The files had been scheduled for release at a specific time, in a way that would ensure maximum exposure. Lucas wasn't going to let Damon and Vanessa talk their way out of this. But first, he needed to make them sweat. That evening, Damon sat in his office, oblivious to the walls closing in around him. The first anonymous email arrived just after 9 p.m. "I know what you did." Damon stared at the screen, frowning. The email had no sender, no traceable source. He dismissed it as spam until the next message arrived. "Your stolen designs. Your fabricated deals. The truth is coming." A wave of unease settled over him. He deleted the email, but his hands lingered over the keyboard. Something about this felt off. When his phone buzzed, he nearly jumped. A text. "Look outside." His breath caught. Slowly, he turned toward the large glass window behind his desk. The city stretched before him, neon lights reflecting off the buildings, traffic moving in a steady hum. But his eyes weren't on the city. They were on the dark silhouette standing across the street. The figure motionless, watching. Damon's heart pounded as he stepped back from the window. Who the hell was doing this? Vanessa's evening wasn't much better. She had just settled into bed, glass of wine in hand, when her phone chimed. A message, no name attached. "Check your bank accounts." She blinked, confusion twisting into unease. Her fingers moved quickly, logging into her online banking. Then she froze. Accounts frozen. All of them. Credit lines suspended. Joint assets locked. The comfortable life she had built, the financial security she had siphoned from Lucas, it was all suddenly untouchable. Panic set in. She dialed Damon. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. Something was happening. And for the first time, she realized they weren't in control anymore. Lucas watched it all unfold from a distance. He hadn't needed to send the messages himself. Zoe had automated the entire process, ensuring that Damon and Vanessa received just enough to unsettle them. Enough to make them look over their shoulders. Enough to make them start making mistakes. He had spent years being the one caught off guard. Now it was their turn. And this was just the beginning. Lucas stood in the center of the grand ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in his hand. Around him, the city's most influential architects, investors, and executives mingled, exchanging empty pleasantries. The air was thick with self-importance, the room filled with the kind of people who thrived on power, reputation, and control. This was exactly where Damon wanted to be. But tonight, everything would change. Lucas had spent weeks orchestrating this moment. Every carefully planned step, every calculated leak of information had led here. The whispers had already begun. Key figures in the industry had received anonymous emails hinting at financial misconduct, stolen designs, and conflicts of interest. Tonight, they would see the proof with their own eyes. At the front of the room, a large screen flickered to life. The scheduled presentation was supposed to be about Damon's latest architectural project, a design he had claimed as his own, but one Lucas had drawn years ago. The microphone crackled. A familiar voice filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here tonight. Before we begin, I'd like to share something of great importance." Damon's voice. But Damon wasn't speaking. Across the ballroom, he stood frozen, his expression shifting from confusion to horror. On the screen, a slideshow began. Blueprints, email exchanges, financial records, a timeline of stolen ideas and fabricated achievements. Evidence of designs Damon had claimed as his own, designs Lucas had spent years perfecting, only to watch them be rebranded under another name. The crowd murmured, shifting uncomfortably. Conversations hushed as the weight of the revelation settled in. And then the real evidence appeared. Screenshots of encrypted messages between Damon and Vanessa, private discussions of bank transfers, leaked documents, and detailed instructions on how to ensure Lucas never suspected what was happening. The room went silent. Lucas didn't move. He didn't need to. He watched as the realization dawned on everyone present. Investors who had funded Damon's projects turned toward him with accusing glares. Executives who had signed contracts with his firm whispered among themselves. The people who had once sung his praises were now distancing themselves, the scent of scandal sending them into self-preservation mode. Damon took a step forward, his face pale. "This is a mistake," he tried to say, his voice cracking under the pressure. This isn't what it looks like." But no one was listening. A security officer approached, murmuring something into his earpiece before making his way toward Damon. Vanessa wasn't faring any better. Across the room, she stood rigid, gripping the back of a chair as if it was the only thing keeping her upright. She knew what was coming. The financial fraud, the frozen accounts, the way she had funneled money through carefully hidden transactions. It was all about to come crashing down. Lucas finally placed his glass down. His work here was done. He didn't need to watch the fallout any longer. As he stepped away from the gathering chaos, he felt no satisfaction, no moment of triumph. Only the quiet certainty that those who had built their lives on deception had just witnessed its collapse. And that was enough. The fallout was swift and merciless. By morning, news of the scandal had spread across industry circles, bleeding into mainstream media. Headlines exposed fraud, stolen intellectual property, and financial misconduct, all tied to Damon and Vanessa. Their names, once synonymous with success, were now attached to disgrace. Lucas watched from a distance. He had no reason to celebrate. This wasn't about revenge, it was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen from him. Damon's career collapsed overnight. His firm distanced itself from him, clients pulled their contracts, and legal action loomed on the horizon. No investor would touch his projects now. He had built his success on stolen work, and without it, he was nothing. Vanessa faced a different kind of reckoning. With bank accounts frozen and assets under investigation, her comfortable lifestyle crumbled. She had spent years ensuring her financial security at Lucas's expense, but now, she was left with nothing. Lucas didn't contact her. He didn't need to. He had already moved on. A few days later, Lucas sat in a quiet cafe, a steaming cup of coffee in front of him. Across the table, Evelyn slid a folder toward him. "It's done," she said simply. Lucas flipped through the documents. Divorce finalized. Legal protections in place. Financial losses minimized. Vanessa had fought to claim a share of his assets, but with the fraud evidence stacked against her, she had no leverage. She walked away with only the clothes on her back. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas felt free. That evening, a call came from an unexpected number. "This is Hiroshi Nakamura," the voice said, "from Kyoto Architectural Innovations." Lucas straightened in his seat. "We've been following your work for years, Mr. Calloway," Nakamura continued. "We've also seen how your designs were stolen and how you handled the situation with integrity. We believe you're exactly the kind of architect we need for our next urban sustainability project in Osaka." Lucas exhaled, absorbing the weight of the offer. A fresh start. A chance to build something meaningful, this time under his own name. "When can you start?" Nakamura asked. Lucas smiled. "Soon." As he packed his bags for Japan, he took one last look at the city skyline. Damon and Vanessa had tried to destroy him, but in the end, they had only set him free. The best revenge wasn't ruining them. It was moving forward. And that's exactly what he was going to do.